Real quick, hey, Dave in Pennsylvania, it says here that you're a Satanist and you have a reason we should be less courteous to Christians. I first have to note that less is a relative term. Less courteous than Matt or less courteous than me?
Personally, I think Matt is far too courteous. I mean, given the last call, I would have told him to fuck off right away.
I think he didn't do that as a favor to me because I'm sitting closer to the phone. But
well, that's fine. I mean, you handle it your way. Matt handles it his way. But the broader question was, I was curious because I've been watching the show for quite a long time.
Thank you. Like and subscribe.
Oh, well, I have. I haven't given you any money because I'm broke as shit. But Matt has said, and I think you have as well, that you were both religious, or at least steeped in religion at one time. Matt, I think, said he was studying to become a pastor, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Matt, may I ask a question? When you were reading the Bible and studying this, how did you respond to the stories that were just logically silly? I mean, people being turned into salt, talking snakes. When you reached these stories, when you were reading through it and hit these, how did you deal with it personally?
So when you say that something is logically silly, it's only the case that it's silly for somebody to turn into pillar salt. If, in fact, it's the case that there's not a God who has the capacity and desire to do that. And if you...
sorry, if I could interject. I get it.
If you get it, why'd you ask?
Debates. Well, no, I get the logical aspect of the twisting it. But just from a comedic standpoint, didn't you hit those stories and go, that doesn't make any sense? I don't want to get into a deep... We could do the whole, Daniel Dennett kind of philosophical thing, but how did you get to that point and go, oh, that's okay? I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm being honest. Because I read them from a non-religious standpoint.
And I never did, and if you hadn't interrupted, I would have gotten there, because I was indoctrinated from the age of 5, so when I read the Bible, I already believed this. And that's why it took years to get to the point of realizing, hey, maybe I don't have a good reason to believe there's a God, and if that's the case, then all of a sudden these stories that you immediately identified as silly start becoming more obviously silly or illogical or irrational or without supporting evidence to me. But I was fighting through indoctrination. It takes time to get there.
So you're saying that, and again, I'm not trying to be an asshole to you.
Well, then you should let me finish the remark that I was in the middle of to the question that you asked me specifically.
Okay, fine.
I mean, you want me to be nastier to Christians. I'm just showing you what it looks like.
You can be nasty to me all you want. I get it all the time. I'm fine with that. But you're saying that because of the indoctrination.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to get my head around it because I wasn't indoctrinated. Because of the indoctrination, you were able to kind of, what's the best word, swirl this into a rational way of thinking. Am I understanding
It is rational. It's not swirled. It is rational given that prior belief. If, for example, I believe that somebody loves me, I could be wrong about that, but if I believe that somebody loves me, that fundamentally changes the way I assess things about that relationship. We're right back to the stalking thing. If I think Taylor Swift loves me, then it's reasonable for me to conclude that something she said may have been a secret message to me that she just didn't want to communicate to everybody else. This is the problem, is that initial belief doesn't ever get challenged for most people. Instead, they are surrounded by everybody else believing the same thing. And so what's the motivation for you to stand up against the overwhelming majority of everybody who's lived in the last 10,000 years?
No, I agree with that. I totally understand that. But because where I'm from, everyone was religious, but...
I'm sorry to hear that.
They didn't necessarily, they didn't talk about it, and it wasn't like it was grilled into you necessarily, but everyone just assumed everyone was the same version of Christian. And for you, it was grilled into you. Is that correct?
Yes.
It wasn't like, it's just that everybody around me believed. It's the same reason people can't see their privilege, because they're surrounded by people who share those same advantages. And by the way, the whole thing about privilege is nobody's saying that you're terrible or this is your fault in any sense. They're just trying to get you to recognize that, hey, human beings are different. Some of them are advantaged in some areas where they're not. Well, if you are surrounded by everybody, like you feel as you're standing up in church singing, you feel this euphoria and elation and goosebumps and hair rising up, and everybody around you is seeming to have the same experience, and they all are convinced that it's the Holy Spirit, so you become convinced that it's the Holy Spirit. And if that process is repeated over and over and over from the age of 5 all the way up to the age of 30, then it takes some effort to go, hang on a minute, what if I'm wrong about my foundation that is allowing me to view all these other things? That is something that doesn't cross people's mind, because everybody else around you, if you were wrong about there being a God, why wouldn't you have figured this out ages ago? Why wouldn't all these other smart people who are around you have figured this out?
No, I understand.
It is, within that context, absurd to think that you might be wrong.
Right. Again, it's an environmental thing. This is where you are, and everyone thinks the same way. So that's where you were.
Yes.
Was it? I'm assuming the transition was fairly difficult.
It depends on how you define difficult. It took some time. I don't suffer with it the way other people did. Like, I've never had a fear of hell in my entire life.
Well, no, I don't mean that. I mean family members kind of disowning you or being disrespectful to you.
Yeah, on my 50th birthday, I read the birthday card I got from my mom.
Oh, I remember. I think I saw that episode.
Yeah, so we'll just say it's been difficult.
That's some shit. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, what else we got? Being less respectful to... Sorry?
Oh.
We got at least one other call we're going to try and get to.
Yeah, we're like 40 minutes over.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I'll be brief. I think that Matt is... I think that I like your show. I watch the Atheist Experience all the time. I think that at times we should be a lot less respectful to Christians when they... the frustration for me is when they call in with the same argument that they've called in for the past 5 episodes.
That's never, ever, 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 ever happened. This is your bias showing. No individual has called me 5 times in a row with the same argument. What there are many different individuals. You are assuming that they've heard this stuff, that they've thought about this stuff, that maybe they are regular viewers of the show. That's not the case. One of my biggest pet peeves is being forced by someone to repeat myself. And yet I have answered and responded to the same arguments for 15 years. And the reason it doesn't bother me is because I know there's always a new audience and that this caller is not the same person that I talked to last week, usually.
I slightly disagree. I think they are the same caller. They just modify their argument, whatever it is, the teleological argument or whatever. They modify it slightly when they call back in.
Let me just ask real quick for clarification.
Sure.
When you say you think they're the same caller, do you mean you believe that the one human being that called in on episode A is the same human being that called in on episode B? Or do you mean the arguments are effectively the same?
The arguments are, like, say, for instance, Otangelo, as an example. A lot of times they call in with more or less the same set of arguments. They've modified them slightly to try to, calibrate themselves to your rebuttals. But then they call in, and it's more or less the same argument they've had in the past calls. Am I off base?
That does happen. So to be clear, you're saying that hosts of these shows should be less courteous to a repeat caller that doesn't actually stop using an argument that you've already responded to, or that calls in every time to repeat the same argument, like a single human? Or are you saying that day one, Sally calls in and gives an argument, gives the teleological argument, and episode 2, Joe Schmo calls in and gives the teleological argument. Joe Schmo should be treated more harshly because we've heard the argument before?
No. I'm talking about repeat callers, people that are the same people. They've slightly modified their argument to attempt to, diffuse some of the rebuttals.
But
it's the same argument.
No. Here's the problem.
Okay.
Person A calls the show and presents an argument, and I offer a rebuttal. So then they go back and they rework their argument, and they call back in with their rework, for which I have to offer a rebuttal. They have done exactly what they should have done, and I'm not going to shit on them for that.
Well, doesn't it frustrate you, though? I mean, it frustrates me, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm bringing this up just as a viewer. It is frustrating to me,
Why?
but I understand why. I understand why you're rehashing it, but
it's not a rehashing. You just acknowledged they called in with a slightly different version. And the thing is, the Christian that's sitting out there, or the theist that's sitting out there that listened to them call in last week and watched them get demolished because they had flaws in their argument, is watching potentially again. And now they've called in with what is perceived to be a better argument. And that other person who's watching may have done exactly the same thing. They may have said, oh, what you should have said is this. And now that person calls back in and says with that. And now I'm hitting 2 people.
And actually, better than that, the person just sitting at home and watching might have thought, oh, there's no reason for them to modify it. And then the repeat caller calls in and says, yes, I acknowledge the points you made, and I think I've addressed them. And then the person sitting at home, who was more epistemologically closed, is now less so.
This is a TV show with hundreds of thousands of people watching any given episode. This is not, I'm going to sit down and argue with my mom the same arguments we argue every week over and over and over again to an audience of 1. This is a different thing.
I get that. I'm saying that from my perspective, and I'm just one person, do what you want to do, it's your show. That's, to me, one of the frustrations I have, is that the argument really isn't.
So, yeah.
He said, do what you want to do, it's your show, and I thought it would be funny to hang up, and then Jamie nodded, but then he seemed to retract it. So now I owe him an apology.
It's all good. We'll